Hey there, you're watching Bare Knuckle Binder. Welcome to the channel. This is Della, my 1956 S-160 4x4. As cool as this truck is, I'm surprised I don't have it on the channel more. But to be honest, I wish I drove it more than I do. But I know the reason for that. This truck has never idled well, and it runs hot. And both those conditions can usually be traced to a vacuum leak. Now, the most probable cause for a vacuum leak in a motor like this is a worn throttle shaft in the carburetor. Now, a vacuum leak on any motor is a problem because it leans out the fuel mixture, and among other problems, a lean fuel mixture burns hotter. But a vacuum leak is a distinct problem for carbureted engines, since carburetors are passive fuel systems, meaning the vacuum created by the pistons traveling down the bores is what draws air in through the carburetor, and the carb is set up to mix that air properly with fuel into a combustible vapor. So a vacuum leak is introducing extra air into what should be mixed. So when I got it, this truck had a GM Rochester carb on it, which is incorrect. So I replaced it with a single barrel Holley 1904, which is what it came with from the factory. Now, on many carbs, including this one, there is an idle circuit that is activated by the throttle plate closing and the vacuum having to pull through those tiny ports going around the throttle plate. These openings deactivate once the throttle plate is cracked open. However, if the throttle plate is closed and a vacuum leak is present, the idle circuit is now competing with a path of lesser resistance. Under these conditions, the idle circuit will not activate. This is why motors with vacuum leaks need to idle so high. It's because they need the throttle plate cracked to keep feeding fuel to stay running. And to be mechanically correct about it, a motor with a vacuum leak induced high idle is not technically high idling, it is just always running at partial throttle. All right, I went through the parts pile, and this is what the throttle plates on these carbs. This is a husk of a carb, but these are the throttle plates. And I went through all of them, and I found this one. This is probably the tightest throttle shaft, so we'll get to that. And this is a worn out throttle shaft. I'll stick it in here, you can see, maybe. All right, so I don't know if the camera's really picking that up, but there is some play. You can actually feel the play in the throttle shaft. It's not a lot, but air doesn't take a lot to get through. Okay, so I had to bring it inside because the sunlight was causing problems in seeing the details, but this is what the throttle plate looks like on a Holley 1904 carb. These are obviously incomplete. I just pulled them out of the parts pile, but this one is a very worn throttle shaft. Now, throttle shaft is typically made of brass. Let's pull it out of here. And you can see how worn this is. This is really toasted. Installing this in a carb would just give you problems. Now this one isn't great, but it's a lot better. I don't feel the side play. I can't feel it bopping around in the bore. It is missing that screw, but this round thing here is the throttle plate. Now, if you look, you'll see that there's little holes when the throttle plate closes, these little bores, and that is what helps activate your idle circuit. Of course, that would negate it, but we'll fix that. Now on the bottom here, you can also see, where is it? That'd be easier. There it is. That hole opening up right there. You can see air through it. So actually what that is, that's your idle air control. So you set your idle air mixture right there. And there's another hole. And I believe that is your idle circuit. There's also this, which is confusing to a lot of people because this just goes up next to a gasket normally. because this bolts to the intake manifold. But a lot of these trucks had hoof governors, which meets up with that, and so that's a whole other thing. Otherwise, don't worry about it. But yeah, that's the throttle plate. Pretty good, decent illustration of the idle circuit ports. And this is a pretty tight throttle shaft. So did you expect anything less? Come on. All right, so 3 quick notes before I yank the carburetor off this truck and check it. One is that I've already done several things to this truck to try to smooth out the idle and minimize the chance of vacuum leaks. I've rebuilt the head, I've planed the manifold, I've checked and replaced all vacuum hoses going to the brake booster. And more, just everything I could. So it pretty much brings me back down to the carb. Number 2, another thing worth mentioning is that if you're talking like logically, a worn throttle shaft is not enough by itself to make a truck run hot all the time. Because really, if you're cracking that throttle plate, the vacuum leak, if the only vacuum leak is the throttle shaft, then that vacuum leak disappears once that throttle plate is cracked open. So, but one thing to keep in mind is that lean jetting, retarded timing, poor cooling, and then maybe a worn throttle shaft, all that stuff adds up really quickly. And 3, and this is actually where I would like to hear from anyone watching this. This truck, I have done a lot to try to clean out the water jacket. When I rebuilt the head, when I had that off, I pulled all the freeze plugs. I cleaned it out as much as I could. However, the drain plug was frozen in there and I didn't have a chance to drill it out, replace it, all that. So I know there's still some stuff in there. One of my very soon projects is to flush this block. Now, I have used off-the-shelf cooling system flushes years ago to pretty blah results. I wasn't really impressed. So I'm contemplating something like citric acid. Possibly we bring Evaporust back into the mix. Something. Let me know what y'all think, because this is something I'm really interested in trying. I have several international motors in storage waiting to be stuffed into trucks this year, and they could all use an extreme amount of water jacket cleaning. Other than that, they're great motors, but the water jackets look like a war zone. So let me know in the comments what you would do. I want to know if there's something that you've used to the point that you'd never try anything else that works so good. So help me out. All right, let's tear into this thing. So before we tear it apart, we might as well hear it run and see how low we can get it to idle. Now you gotta choke this thing, and a lot of people think, well, I don't have to increase the idle or hit the throttle, I just have to choke it a lot. But on an international, the carburetor is set up in a unique way that when you pull the choke actually has a cam on it. When it pulls on the choke lever, it actually has a cam, and the throttle stop goes on that. So when you pull the choke out, it actually increases the throttle. So International had that because, you know, if you're warming up the truck on a cold day, you could choke it and increase the motor speed without hitting the throttle cable. So if you think that just choking it and not increasing the throttle is what you're doing, sorry to say. Electric fuel pump doing its thing. Come on, baby. Maybe need some more choke. Let's idle her down. it just dies after that. All right, so let's tear this carb off. You can also tell I don't run this truck enough because that gas smells awful. Old, stank gas. Ugh. The sun's pretty bright here. Got this carb kind of draining out. Luckily I have this crack in my tailgate but right off, throttle shaft has all kinds of problems, but I think you can probably even see on camera how it's rattling around in there. That's possibly one of the worst I've ever seen. So I'm just gonna replace this entire throttle body here. Just pull it out, pop another one in. Looks like I'll rob one of the screws out of this thing to put in the other one, but I'll be right back. Okay, so I put the parts throttle plate on there, and I put the idle air adjustment screw in. Now it's starting from zero. The best practice I've found is to screw it all the way in. You don't want to tighten it like crazy because you don't want to gouge that needle, but run it all the way in and then back it off 1.5 turns, and that's a pretty decent place to start. You can adjust it from there. But all right, let's put this thing back on. All right, well, I had to go in the house for a little bit and have breakfast, and now this is Texas, so it is hot. It is already almost 10:30 in the morning. I went through and I cut a new gasket out of cork. Normally I use like a fiber thing, and I like to use gasket shellac to take up, because this is a very common spot for vacuum leaks on a carb. The cork will help take it up a little bit. That's all I had, and I don't have any gasket shellac right now because we just moved, so I don't think I'll be able to find anything I own ever for the rest of my life. But seal all is really great, but you don't need a lot of it on here. So I'm just kind of dabbing enough on there just so I can really thin. You have to get carried away. It's just got to be around the basic circle. You don't have to go around the bolt holes or anything. And like I said, I'd rather use shellac for this than seal all. But seal all, this is some amazing stuff. You definitely want to have that in your toolbox. Gas resistant sealant. But I am hesitant to really glue this thing together because I'm not real sure this is the entire problem. All right. Oof. Okay. There she goes. Well, she wanted to go there. It's running better already, I think. Better warm up a little bit. But it's already idling slower. Believe it or not, that's better. Well, it's getting better. If nothing else, at least I drove it over to some shade here. But I think clearly, I think a lot of the problem I'm having is that throttle shaft. The one that I got out of the parts pile, it was all right. It was better, clearly better, but it wasn't perfect. And, you know, the truck is running better, but not perfect. So one thing leads to another. So I had the hood open and I'm thinking to myself, didn't you just say you replaced all these vacuum hoses? I've checked and replaced all vacuum hoses going to the brake booster.
I've checked and replaced all vacuum hoses. I've checked and replaced all vacuum hoses.
And then I said to myself, what's that then? This guy right here. This. That guy. And I have a vacuum leak that I have been trying so hard to trace. And I think it might be that. So I'm gonna pull this. I have a cap for it. Look at that. I got a cap for it. I can just cap it here. I gotta get a replacement for that, obviously. I mean, it's not even lining up. I'm sure that's stressed. Usually, you can get starting fluid and run the truck and spray it around there and see if it speeds up to find a vacuum leak. That's the preferred method, old school. You know, just get a running motor and just spray starting fluid all over the manifold and stuff. It's great fun for the whole family, especially the one who's got 911 on speed dial. It's actually a little safer than it sounds, but so this truck has a vacuum reservoir, and it has this thing that it's always done. When you shut it off, it'll, you know, maybe 10-15 seconds after you shut it off, you'll hear this little and the vacuum gauge will go down, lose all the vacuum. And I have looked all over everything except this damn hose now, and I know it's on this side of the check valve because the gauge reads on this side of the check valve. So let me cap this thing off and see what it does. Or I could pull everything out of the manifold and plug it there, put it just a steel plug in there until you sort it out. That would probably be the best idea, but take all the fun out of it. So I'm gonna cap this with my little black cap here, and let's see what she does. Yeah, I don't think that was sealing anything. Little dried out rubber hose. Blah. Oh yeah, come on, baby. Let's give that a try. All right, here we go. Needs a little tuning, but it's not perfect, but I think this is the slowest it's ever idled. So we're gonna go around, we're trying to find this vacuum leak, but it's gotta have one there. Also, since I brought it up, this is a gasket shellac. I found it when I was looking for something for the Holden brothers in the shipping container with all my parts, but I had already found this one. This is an unused one, and I like to keep these in a place I always know where I can find them. And there's different names for it, but I just call it the parts store. Fine, I'll do it right. Now, I'm not gonna have the brake booster, so just gotta know that going down the road, but just stopping the truck itself shouldn't be too big of a deal. Pretty sure the brake booster wasn't working when I drove it from California, so. All right, choking it. Wish me luck. Big money, no whammies. What? It was so powerful. So powerful now it doesn't want to run. I clearly just fixed it too good, so. Oh, no, but seriously, I gotta go put the battery on the charger. I have suspected that this alternator isn't working right now for some reason, so I don't know if I gotta clean contacts or whatever, but when I was moving this truck over to this new property, it was coming from harvester night. I'd have the harvester night in April, and when it was done I drove it out here, and it was raining that day, and so I had all the lights on, and because I'm me, I had the beacon light twirling and everything, and it actually died in traffic. I managed to get it going and only used necessary lights or electronics, and then made it all the way here. So that's something else I get to diagnose and fix. You know, old stuff, it's always something. But all right, let me get this battery in the charger and we'll be right back. I just wiggled the cables, so let's see, just maybe. Oh! Oh, cool. I don't know if that's better. It seems a little more stable. Maybe we can mess with the timing. Alright. So, got the sunset going on in the back. I drove it up here by the house, a little closer to the battery charger, if anything else, but let's time this thing. It's running a little advanced, so if I grab this thing and so this thing runs counterclockwise, so when you turn it counterclockwise you're retarding the spark, so it's actually really far advanced. Hold on. All right, so we were about right here. Check this out. Oh, it's starting to sound like a truck to me. Well, now that's something. Smooth, baby. All right, push and choke in. Choke is all the way in, baby. So she was very far advanced because of the gotta work out some kinks here. I gotta adjust the idle air and all right, so I ran out of daylight last night. I recorded a whole end to this video, but I went to edit it and it's way too grainy. So today, it's the next morning. I took advantage of having a little extra time and having to re-film this. And so I went through and I cleaned up the ignition. There was some funny stuff about how the actual vacuum advance hardware was bolted down, where it was like binding up, and so just all kinds of problems. And so I went through and it's cleaned everything, cleaned up the points, reset the gap, you know, went through, cleaned up the distributor cap, the rotor, you know, set everything up. And so now it's timed really close to what it should be, but I've got another problem now, which could be feeding into the vacuum a little bit. Now, I even had to turn the truck on to show you this, but whenever I hit the accelerator pump there, it leaks out below it. So that means the diaphragm for the accelerator pump inside the carb is torn. I've noticed that it's been leaking gas like that. Sometimes on a 1904, there's a little overflow here. Sometimes it leaks out of the bowl. It has leaked out of the bowl on this one several times. I ended up making a thick cork gasket for it and that stopped. So now I had to tear apart the carb and replace the accelerator pump diaphragm. But man, what a difference. That's beautiful. I love it. All right, so the truck is not running perfect, but it is within spitting distance of actually being where it should. This all started out as chasing down a worn throttle shaft in a carburetor, and that definitely was a problem, but as we found out, there was more to it than just that, which is par for the course. Now, let's say we had a worn throttle shaft and I didn't have a pile of parts, or you have a worn throttle shaft and you don't have a pile of parts like I have. What would you do? Well, a rebuild kit will not take care of a worn throttle shaft. That is something you have to, if you can't do it yourself, which at this point in time, I can't do it myself. So I have to send it to a shop that can remachine a carburetor. And they can make, rebore, and rebush throttle shafts so that they are perfect. There are shops around the nation that do this. My preferred one, just by accident, I bought a carburetor off of eBay for my 49 kV2 years ago, and I just happened to bolt it on and it worked perfectly. I couldn't believe how well the truck ran after that. So this company that I bought the carburetor from, apparently it was a carburetor that somebody had sent in and just never paid for. So once I had a sample of their work, they became my guys, and they have remachined and rebuilt the carburetor for my M5H6 and a few others. So these are the guys. They're based in New Jersey. I am not affiliated with them. I do not get kickbacks. They don't even know who I am, but they do killer work. I've referred friends to them, and the friends that I've referred to them have been amazed at the results in their own trucks. At this point, I want to say that this truck running this good after so long means so much to me. It's really, there's a huge story about how this truck came about, and it started in late 2020, and it has basically changed my life since then. If I hadn't got this truck, I wouldn't have found the L122, and you probably wouldn't know who I am. I started my YouTube channel in 2020 in the summer during COVID when I didn't have anything to do. Working on international trucks is something that I've done my whole life, and I always wanted to help people with like instructional videos or how-to, and one thing led to another, and this truck is really what started me filming adventures of going to get trucks and driving them long distances home. Some of you might know that my dad in 2021, when I was driving this home from California, he flew out to chase me home in my van. And at the time, his cancer was under control, and it turned into this amazing father-son trip that I cherish completely. But we had so many problems with this truck initially. From the junkyard where I got it to Grass Valley was about 40 miles. And that was the first leg of the trip we had to take it on. It took 4 hours to go 40 miles. And eventually we broke down in Truckee, California with it. Couldn't go any further. It acted like it was running out of fuel. We changed fuel filters, fuel pumps, fuel line. We went through the ignition, everything. Finally, we broke down at 1:30 in the morning in Truckee, California, with drunks walking by us and yelling at us about the truck. And we sat in a gas station trying to figure this thing out. Some of you might know, but I grew up with international trucks, so my dad knows these motors inside and out. I know these motors inside and out. And I remember sitting with him in that gas station, sitting in the van thinking, what is it that we could be missing? How is it that the two of us can't figure this thing out? And it ended up being in the base of the distributor was dry and unlubricated and was sticking. And we figured it out. It was such an amazing moment, and the truck ran so much better for most of the trip, but we still had these problems with heat, and you know, it wouldn't idle down. And I thought I went through everything with a vacuum, and this is just a perfect example of how you can know what you're doing and you can overlook something. But I guess my whole point about all of this is that when I heard this truck run like it should, or at least close to, last night, I got so excited. I was so happy, and at the same time, it broke my heart a little bit because all I wanted to do was call my dad and tell him about it. And I guess my point is, like and subscribe if you want to, but please call your family if you still got them. Tell them you love them. It's too short not to make the most of it. So thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.